Brilliant. Hi, I'm Steve from Nearly Wild, and I'm here today with...
Hi, I'm Lee Barber, and I'm from the BTO.
BTO, he's also from lots of other things. We'll come to that in a minute. We're actually sat just outside Thetford. What did you say? Something about bird poo?
Yeah, so all the stuff that comes out of chicken farms and things, all the sawdust and poo comes here to be burnt at the power station.
So we're actually, if you can hear a small hum in the background, it's the power station. So that's really, the whole power station is run on bird poo?
Basically, yeah.
Crikey, that says something about how many poultry farms we've got nowadays in Britain, doesn't it? Anyway, moving swiftly on from the environmental impacts of that, because that's another big topic for a future date. We actually looked up, there's a peregrine sat up on the top of the chimney stack, which is quite nice to see. Anyway, back to reality, or maybe that's reality. Great to be here. Lee and I have known each other for a long time. Lee, just give us a little bit of a feel, so people who haven't known you or met up with you. How did you get to be working for BTO, so British Trust for Ornithology?
Yeah, well, it all started with, I went to uni at Aberystwyth and did a zoology degree. Then my first job was for yourself, which was very good.
Worked with us. Yeah.
That's it, yeah. And then became a warden at the Farne Islands Nature Reserve. And then, got a winter contract at the BTO doing some bird surveys.
Which birds was that?
Just farmland ones.
Okay, I thought it was. I remember back to,
Yeah, well, I applied for it, didn't get it, but I got a recoveries job.
Okay.
So working in the ringing and nest recording team.
Right.
And that 6-month contract went on for another 6 months, then another 6 months, and I'm still there 15 years later.
That sounds a familiar story with quite a few friends who've worked in conservation and environment, wildlife related jobs, that kind of a seasonal or a temporary job that just keeps never ending, or constantly having to redo the next.
Yes, indeed. Thankfully I didn't have to apply each time.
Right.
They just said, we haven't thought about it yet. We'll just give you another 6 months.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you do with BTO now?
So my role technically is the demographic surveys organiser.
Good,
which
okay.
is a bit of a mouthful and nobody really knows what that means.
Maybe that's the reason for that strange noise in the background.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So the demographic bit is trying to figure out sort of the life cycles of birds and see how that fits in and how it changes between years. Right. So I manage, I look after, I'm the organiser of, actually, the Constant Effort Site Scheme ringing. So I'm in the ringing department and the nest recording department. Right. So lots of ringers go out and they do some ringing in a standardised way, and they get a massive amount of information from doing that. And I coordinate that. So that's good. The other part of my job is the nest recording, and lots of volunteers. We've got at least 600 people that go out recording nests. So they go find a nest, look what's in it, and basically write down what's happening. And from that, we can have sort of a wealth of information on how birds are breeding. And obviously, if birds are struggling at any point in their life, it's usually at that point. And unpicking what's potentially driving a population decline, and then it's easier to fix it if you know what's going wrong. So let's start with the second one first, almost this thing about nest recording. Can I just go out and start recording and I just phone you up and say I'm going to start letting you know about nests, or do I need to have gone on some sort of training, or how does that work? It's surprisingly easy, actually. Right. You don't need training as such, right? But we do recommend that you sign up to the Nest Record Scheme, right? Which go onto the BTO website, Nest Record Scheme, and sign up there, and you'll be given the code of conduct. So it'll tell you basically how to behave around nests, what to do, what not to do, and that's your training, basically. Right. And it depends. You can record any nest, from a swan to a pigeon. Anything like that. And you record what's in the nest. So when you say what's in the nest, are we talking about whether it's got sticks or feathers, or are we talking about whether it's got eggs or... we really need contents. So how many eggs, how many chicks, and then what happens at the outcome. But we also record what stage the nest is at. So if you find it with a few sticks, then you can write that down. And then you basically follow the nesting through until the chicks fledge, ideally, or fail. Okay. Yeah. Right. So you know, if you've got your local park and it's summertime and you walk out and you see her moorhen sitting on a nest and she stands up, you can count how many eggs and you're a nest recorder.
Right, okay. So that helps us understand more about the bird, obviously before it's born, through to it leaving the nest, and what sort of numbers we're getting, and we can then potentially, presumably, relate that to whether there's food in the area or whether there's particular chemicals around it. Is that the kind of direction?
Yeah, we can. A lot of information can be told from just recording the nest and where it is, because we at the BTO know what habitat is around it, what's been happening in the area, and sometimes even landowners need to know what's going on, because they might have done something or they might be thinking about doing something. So we can at least say what's nesting there and what could be an issue.
And then, so if that gives us the nesting stuff, and then what's the scene with the recording then for the ringing side of things? What's that about?
Yeah, so with the nest recording part, it's basically looking at just in the nest, so what happens there. When they leave the nest, this is when the ringing thing kicks in. So some nest recorders are ringers as well, so they can put rings on the chicks. And
they've been trained.
They've been trained, It does take several years to learn to be a ringer. And so the two schemes that I look after, the Constant Effort Site scheme and the Retrapping Adults for Survival, CS and RAS.
Okay. You'll be tested on that at the end.
They focus on, they produce some really interesting information on the survival of the adults and how well that works, and if it changes between years, because obviously some birds, harsh winter, don't survive very well. So we can monitor that.
Excuse me.
Then we've got abundance, basically how many birds are around of that particular species, and then productivity, which is a slightly different figure from the nest recording productivity figure we can get.
Okay, why?
We've got a productivity figure of the how many chicks they produce per nesting attempt. And then when they leave the nest, obviously the chicks have got different forces on them. They've got potentially more predation. They've got to learn to feed, fly, all sorts of things. So we can measure how well the breeding season's done at that stage. And that's usually done by looking at the ratio between adults and juveniles. So if you've got lots of juveniles, few adults, you think, good breeding season. And that can be done as well on an annual basis. So I'm just compiling the figures at the moment from 100 odd CES sites around the country. And once that's all finalised, we're going to put it into the system, and I'll be able to look on the screen and look at graphs for how well birds have been breeding this year, which is very exciting. Greenfinch, actually, really interestingly, greenfinch has been going down loads recently because of trichomoniasis. A disease that, it's a parasite that lives in the throat and grows, and eventually the bird can't eat. But this year, just by looking at the raw figures, I've seen quite a few birds being caught now, adults and juveniles. There was one site that did, I think it was about 50 greenfinch in 12 visits. So that's quite a lot. So I'm expecting that decline at the moment to have a little dot going up now for this year.
Interesting.
But
why
time
do you
will
think?
tell.
You think it's just the disease, or do you think there's anything else going on there?
I think a lot of it is the disease in this case, because it's very contagious, especially around garden feeding stations. So, it's really nice.
Interesting. Okay, so one thing we were talking about earlier that I'm interested in, maybe to explain a little bit more about, is we were talking about goldcrests and firecrests, particularly firecrests, and you were saying that some of them don't even live longer than a year. And I've always thought of, you tend to think of insects being short-lived, but a year for a bird, that's pretty extreme. And then you were talking about the numbers of eggs they produce. Tell me a little bit more about this, because I think, it's quite helpful for people that are sort of starting to look at understanding more about the natural world to just realise just what a broad spectrum even birds are in terms of the longevity.
That's partly why I got into birds at the start, to be honest, because it's fascinating. Each bird is different, and then you've got different areas that birds behave differently. So, goldcrest, they generally produce quite a lot of chicks, and they can have several broods as well. So they can produce, 15 or so chicks. And to do that, they basically have to, they don't live very long.
Right.
So it's a bit like a mouse situation where they have loads of babies and chuck them out and hopefully they survive.
Yeah.
Birds like swan, for example, they have one attempt, they lay 5, 6, 7 eggs, and you know that they're not all going to survive.
Yeah.
So if they're lucky, they get 2 or 3 off, and then that's that. But they do live to be 27 years old.
Yeah,
so
right.
they've got the time to invest in this.
Yeah.
So
how does the work that you do? I'm sorry if I appeared slightly distracted. Then we had some enormous dog just went past, and yeah. So anyway, how does what you do relate to understanding, say, something like more about the firecrest and that kind of interesting relationship between the number of eggs, how the survival of the bird is, how it relates to food that's available, that type of thing?
Yeah, it's all about knowledge, isn't it? So the nest recording scheme started in 1939, somewhere around there, and it was called the Hatchling and Fledgling Inquiry,
right?
Which is it's quite interesting. And the aim of it was going to be a short-term survey for a start, for like a couple of years, and they were going to study 10 species. And now we do 50. We get about 43,000 nest records a year for about 50, 60.
43,000 nest records.
Yes.
That's just nest records.
Just nest records.
Struth.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So we're talking major data handling.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
And that's really brilliant because the more data we have, the more accurate the results can be.
Yeah.
So we're at a stage where not only we can say this is happening for a species per year, we can hone it down into East England.
Yeah.
That's the population. Then compare it between West England, Scotland, all sorts of things.
So when people are talking about things like the reduction in farm birds or whatever, the information that you've got is really informing that and helping us really understand the detail behind it.
Definitely. Yeah. It's analysing the cause basically.
Yeah.
So from other bird surveys, like the breeding bird survey that the BTO run, that detects declines, so on a larger scale. So you can say there's a problem with this particular species in this particular area.
Yeah.
And then the nest record scheme and the ringing also hones it down to say, you want to be focusing on this part of the life cycle. So if it's producing enough insects for yellowhammers to eat, for example, to feed their chicks, that could be the cause.
Right.
So quite a lot of the declines of house sparrow was down to people paving over their gardens in London, and as well as pollution and things like that.
Yeah.
But they just didn't have enough insects to give to their chicks.
Interesting.
Okay,
so something that then comes up, I was thinking about, and you and I have had a bit of a chat about this, is this thing about people now feeding birds in their garden, which is great. You know, we want more birds. We're worried about the farm birds declining, so we're going to put bird feeders up in the garden. But I kind of have this thing of, well, isn't that going to cause spread of disease, or isn't that going to cause other issues in itself? I mean, it's almost like put loads of people in a city, and of course people start getting more health issues.
Yeah.
You know, is there not the same thing happening with birds? Is there anything coming out in that you're seeing on that?
It's a complicated picture.
Right.
It's never simple.
Yeah.
It's never, this is the cause.
But
absolutely. Trying to unpick what's going on is something that the BTO can do really well.
Right.
So there's been several projects that have identified that providing bird food in gardens is good.
Yep.
It does, especially in winter when they're really struggling.
Yep.
Providing it in summertime, it can be really useful as well. But it does, ironically, some of the birds that are lower quality and would have died do survive.
Right.
So that can introduce extra disease, extra plumage differences that could cause issues. So, like if a bird was albino, for example, it can't see very well and then gets predated. But if it survives more, then there's going to be more of those around, which could be a good thing. It could also be a bad thing.
Yeah, okay.
But
you were mentioning as well the thing with the blue tits survive well. Is that right, with the feeding?
Yes, blue tits do survive well in the winter,
and that can affect other birds because the blue tits are surviving better.
Yes, marsh tits, for example, and potentially coal tit as well, do struggle a little bit to get to the food because the blue tits are there. And if you basically inflate the population by providing food for blue tits and great tits that use the feeders quite a lot, then in the natural situation, in the park, for example, or a bit further afield, there's more blue tits around, so increased competition for food and nest sites. And basically the blue tit and great tit win. and the mash tit have got to go somewhere else. And sometimes it's not possible to go somewhere else. So that population just declines.
It's interesting. I mean, I think it's really valuable that you point out it's a really complex system. It's not just complicated, it's complex. And I think as well, you know, we even go so far as to start talking then about, well, if the food that's being used in the feed is having to be produced somewhere, then we've also got the production systems of the bird feed being, and what impact that having on the wider natural world and so on. So, you know, we can get into all sorts of complexities, but yeah, I mean, equally, you know, as you say, we've got to really sort of hone in and identify, is it more positive or less positive? And I think that in a winter feeding situation, it's probably more positive in the majority of situations. And so that kind of approach.
That's it. Apart from disease, obviously.
Right.
When you've got high concentrations, especially if feeders aren't cleaned and they're not moved around, then bird food does build up underneath. So vermin can arrive and spread disease that way, but also within birds as well. So quite a lot of chaffinches, for example, get this thing on their feet where it's called papilloma, which basically growths appear on the feet, and that can transmit between birds. And it's just not good for the bird. It is at all. It probably doesn't kill the bird straight away, but the bird might lose a few toes, for example, and it's a bit more awkward, and it can't clean itself as well. So it's not going to help. And just moving feeders around and spreading out and potentially stopping feeding if you've got a trichomoniasis outbreak, because that's just going to spread disease very quickly. And we've seen that in greenfinches quite a lot, where dead birds potentially everywhere, and that's not even going into bird flu situations.
Yes. Which is probably a whole other topic.
Oh, God,
something occurs to me. I mean, if people are really interested in some of the understanding more about the bird population side and some of this detailed work, then I'm sure Lee and I could chat for a lot longer. So, you know, it may be something we can do a webinar on or something in the future if people are really interested. But there's something, Lee, that I wanted to sort of get your perspective on, because obviously we've known each other for a long time, and I've seen sort of you get more and more involved in the ringing side of things, but you've always been passionate about the natural world. And I remember way back when you were doing little local surveys, and you know we'd chat about the birds you'd seen, and you'd be off down some marsh somewhere or other or whatever.
Getting footprints.
All sorts of things going on. But in the time that you've been involved with kind of working with wildlife, what do you think have been some of the biggest changes, maybe positive changes, that you've seen happen during that time?
There's been a lot of... It's really nice that the environment is starting to take a front row seat, basically, in what's going on. And it is considered, which is a bit of a novelty sometimes. So that's quite nice. I really appreciate that. And mitigation measures as well. So people do try and help if they're going to do something, that they take their environment into account and take measures for that.
And in the time you've been involved in this, you've seen that change happen?
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, that's really interesting.
The diversity of people taking part has also changed quite a lot. Especially, with ringing, this is quite focused, because it's always been sort of quite a white, male sort of group of people. But now it's getting much more diverse, and most of the I've got 9 trainees, and 3/4 of those are women that just want to learn about it. And quite a lot of the nature reserves that I go to, the managers and the wardens are actually women, which is actually quite good. So it's becoming better, I think, in
really
that
interesting.
age.
And one final question then, because otherwise we could be here a very long time, become icebergs amongst other things. But what if, for people now who are wanting to get more involved in working with wildlife, either in a job or just generally, part-time, volunteering, whatever, and not necessarily straight out of uni, it could be any age, but what kind of, do you have any thoughts that you think would worth sharing with people that are thinking more about getting more involved or want to do more in a positive way for wildlife?
I would definitely, a bit like I did really from the start, volunteering is just an amazing thing. Obviously I work at the BTO now, and I get paid to sit in in an office behind a computer.
Yeah.
But all my spare time.
Is that what you get paid for? Because most of the time you're out and about ringing things. Or,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. I don't get paid for that bit.
Oh, okay.
No.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's my hobby.
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm a volunteer, but I also sit in the office as well. So
Right.
it's just an amazing experience getting out and learning about
Right.
the natural world.
Yeah.
And volunteering is just a way of doing it as well. So it's personal enjoyment. It's very selfish. But it's also, I'm doing it for a reason. So all that information that I gather can be used for science and actually help birds at the end of the day.
Right.
Is basically really useful. And I'm getting experience. So looking at the bird surveys, pied wagtails just flying over,
Yeah.
which roost actually at this power station because it's a
Okay.
little bit warmer.
Right. Makes sense.
And just being out and learning about these things, it does make you more employable for a start.
Right.
As well as you're giving back to wildlife, really.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why.
So
I
get
would
out and
recommend.
have a go.
Yeah, indeed. No
It's
matter what
really
it is.
interesting that I know how much work you put into your job, but the amount of time that you also put into volunteering says something about the passion, but as you say, it gives something back as well. It's
does.
not just a one-way street.
Yeah, it's a way of life now. And
Yes.
now I've got
Yeah,
kids.
so your kids have found it out, I think, yeah.
Yeah. We go. All of us go out checking tawny owl boxes and things like that. My daughter really likes going up and to opening the box.
Right.
But my son's a bit too young for climbing a ladder at the moment,
Yeah.
and he only gets to rung 2 as long as we're watching him.
I was going to say, that's as long as he's told he's on the allowed run too,
Yeah.
from what I've seen.
Indeed.
But
Yeah. It's always been a race to actually get to the box before he does.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, everyone enjoys it. It's really
Brilliant.
good. It's good family activity as well, ironically. Yeah, especially when myself and my daughter go out looking at swan nests and monitoring those.
Right.
Because it's fairly easy.
Right.
Because big eggs, big swans, big nest,
Yeah.
easy to find, and collecting really good information. And my daughter loves swans.
Right.
She's obsessed with them. She wants to be a swan when she's older.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's an interesting step in the becoming closer with nature. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've got some education to do there, I think. But she does have a mask of a swan in her neck and that
Brilliant.
sort of thing. Yeah,
Love it.
it's all good.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate that, Lee, and it's been great catching up again because, having a look round, and obviously I'll also be talking with Rachel as well at some point because Rachel is Lee's wife, but also a cetacean expert amongst other things.
Indeed.
So really looking forward to having a good chat with her and a catch up. But yeah, meanwhile, thanks very much for this. Really good to catch up.
You too.
If people want to hear more or learn more about this, then please get in touch because I'm sure Lee will be up for doing a bit more and talking more specific and maybe even some workshop stuff.
Definitely.
Brilliant.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's
Good
a pleasure.
one. I've got
Cheers.
my old man's gloves on today.
Oh, yeah.
It's so blooming
Very
cold
good.
out.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Brilliant.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.